Hey there guys, it's Metro, and today went exactly as everyone should have had planned. Russia dominated in front of a home crowd in Moscow on the first day of the 2018 World Cup. Tiger Woods struggled mightily in Shinnecock Hills at the US Open, and Ion Hazzikostas said absolutely nothing in a 1-hour event that happened today. And really, there's so little that's been said that we have to talk about that because that actually is one of the biggest things that could have been said. Nothing. And there was one thing that we do want to talk about as well, and I think we're going to start with that. But yeah, this Q&A, I want to say it was a waste of time, but it wasn't, because one big thing was brought up, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, all right? So this section here, summarized by MMO Champion. Not exactly what he said. I just listened to it to make sure before I said something that wasn't said. Don't want to make that mistake, but it's pretty similar. So if you haven't been following along for some fucking reason, you can no longer change gear. Not just legendaries, not just Azrak gear. You cannot change any gear in Mythic Plus Dungeons whatsoever. And this is intended, according to the developer of the game, the director of the game. And they gave some reasons which really make it obvious that neither of them do any Mythic Plus. It's a shame because, you know, it's such a big part of the game. Now, I feel like it is the future of this game, and I think a lot of people would agree. And I'm going to give you some reasons why this is, without question, the most short-sighted, not only answer, but decision that has ever happened in this game. There's been a lot of things that have been controversial over the years, but about 95% of them actually make total sense. And this one actually does make total sense, but it took me a little bit to see it. So, it is intended that you are, go one line for here, aren't able to swap gear while inside Mythic Plus Dungeons. He said that it was basically pretty obvious why they were doing this, because you already can't change talents or perhaps even gear in the middle of a raid encounter. So this is the major point of this agreement here, comparing a Mythic Plus dungeon to a raid encounter. His, I think, exact words were, a lot of people would really like to switch gear or trinkets in Phase 4 of Argus, something like that. But that's not how dungeons work, dude. I don't know how the ex-GM of the most noted guild out of the first probably decade of World of Warcraft could ever say that. What has happened to you? Tell me. I'd love to know when you became so disinterested with competition and optimization. You used to run a guild that held a website that was all about this, to the point where if a single person disagreed or presented false equivalencies, something that was slightly misleading, they would be banned. He used to run elitist jerks, okay? And now he's trying to compare a dungeon to a raid encounter. It's just I don't even know. So anyway, what he's saying here is that in order to make the dungeons as controlled and as foster as much important decision-making and competitive play as possible, they're going to make it so you cannot, once you start the dungeon, you cannot change gear or talents. Now, obviously, talents have always, you cannot change them at all unless you walk outside the dungeon. So that's spectacular. And if you've been actually watching the live stream recently, we had a viewer who wanted to do a 22 the other day, and he recommended the best strategy for the 22 was for him to start with a certain spec, build that is, and do about half the dungeon. We did all the trash, one boss, and that's it. And then he would hearth, get summoned back, and he said that would save many minutes. So guess what? Whatever this does, it's not going to do anything. If it's still the best idea to change gear, people are still going to do it. So that alone, that's reason zero. You know what I mean? You're not actually going to be stopping people from doing this. You're just making it less convenient to do it, okay? And the reason, the real reason, reason one, why this is, without question, the most short-sighted thing ever, is because he has described this as if it's equivalent to a raid boss, right? Whereas if a single mistake during a full 10-minute encounter happens, a mistake at the beginning of the 10-minute encounter happens, you might not complete the 10-minute encounter, okay? This is not how dungeons work. In fact, they have never worked this way at any point in the history of this video game. And it got even worse with BFA, but you used to be able to reset the dungeon if you made a mistake, right? You can't do that anymore in Legion and now in BFA, of course. So if you use or start the dungeon with the wrong gear, you're wearing that gear the whole time. You might not even know you have it on. It might be a mistake. You're wearing that gear for the rest of the dungeon. And again, that is not even, like whatever. You make these mistakes, it's on you. But the fact that they're going to just completely throw out 14 years of precedent where any in and out of combat restrictions have always oscillated is frankly really scary. And this is, this is my thought process leading up to this, because this was brought up on Tuesday. They opened Mythic Plus for testing on the beta. I read the thread. The first post about it was somebody talking about not being able to switch gear. I replied. I made like 7 or 8 posts about this topic since then. And it made absolutely no sense to me. It made me think that whoever was doing this has like never done Mythic Plus. And I think regardless of what I'm about to say, I think that is still the case, but it's not necessarily as relevant as I might be making it sound. So regardless, the real reason that dungeons have always been different than raids is because you can get in and out of combat constantly, okay? This is the difference, all right? You can drop combat, and there's a lot of things you can do when you're not in combat that you can't do when you are in combat. Like res the player, res a dead player, drink, consumables to increase your stats. There's so many things. How about switch gear? Pre-pot. So what's next? What are we doing here? You're restricting out of combat things just because they take place within a single 30 to 40 minute timer. Why are we restricting out of combat things? Now, talents make complete sense to me because talents are bigger than gear for sure. Talents give you new abilities, and some of these abilities might be very bad for single target and might be very good for AoE, and this is something they've been trying to fix. So whatever, I don't know, however you want to approach this topic, you can do it, but talents make sense to me. Gear does not, and it makes me think immediately, it's like, well, guess what? The next step is if you potion at any point in the dungeon, you have incurred the entire dungeon's worth of potion. Like, that's it. You can only pot twice before it starts and anytime during the 45-minute encounter. You know what I mean? That's basically what they're saying here. It's just not logical. You don't know what you're saying. This is completely stupid, all right? And this is, again, my thought process for two and a half days now, okay? And then this is like, come on, man, don't say shit like this. Is this the classic forums right now? Is this the fucking classic forums right now with this kind of comment? And this is actually what he said. This was the main reason I wanted to watch this. Because he pretty much said this. The vast majority of most Mythic Plus players aren't swapping gear right now. Yeah, because they're fucking casuals. What are you talking about? The vast majority of people probably don't even change talents ever. How many people, even in my guild, use the exact same talent and gear setup for every single encounter? That's because they're bad. That's not, like, what are you talking about? He's saying this probably to make it be like, oh, well, this isn't really going to affect that many people, and the people it is going to affect should realize that other people are getting by without doing it. So you're effectively saying that you've limited our chance at being the best that we can be, okay? And again, continue on, whatever. This is my thought process the whole time, okay? Regardless, the rest of this stuff isn't necessarily related to gear. There's a whole nother video to make on this, especially the Mythic 10, all this. This is a whole nother video, but I want to focus on this, okay? Because this is the biggest, without question, the most important thing that was brought up today. And what it tells me, like I said, is that I have to choose my words carefully. But regardless, the reason that this is a problem is because this is absolutely going to kill class and gear customization loadouts for pretty much the entirety of Legion, some classes were exceedingly inept at certain things. And those legendary options, like perhaps Pridas or Cephas, they really patched those holes. So basically, what was said by these two guys was they want that decision that you might need to patch a hole to be more important by making it something that you can do less frequently. Okay? So he said that, and I'm thinking, huh. So he, again, clearly, like, you know, talking about something that he doesn't have any experience in. You're not going to, like, if a Shadow Priest needs Pridas on to survive and Ceph is on to do good AoE, which it's not a great example, but regardless, if they need certain gear on to do good AoE and certain gear on to survive, you're just not going to bring a Shadow Priest. You're going to bring the Warlock, who doesn't need any of that stuff. They have a better native kit. So from my perspective, all of this is doing is making the, like, meta more stringent. And that's good for me because I make a lot of tier lists. So it's going to be a lot easier to say what's good and bad. But yeah, it is going to suck if you play a class that's undertuned. Play a Holy Priest, man. Good luck. I don't know what to tell you. This is, again, without question, coming from, you know, the first 2 days of my approach at this, the most short-sighted thing I've ever heard of. And then I started to think about it a little bit more. And I thought, when was the last time I said something like that? When was the last time that something was vastly negatively affecting me, the way I play, the way the people I know play, the way I encourage others to play? When was the last time that happened? Personal loot. The personal loot change that was discussed in previous Q&As. And then it dawned on me. We had the same discussion that night. I said pretty much the exact same things. I went on for, you know, however long. And then somebody commented in the comments down below saying, I don't even know if they said it on purpose, but they effectively said, well, the one thing that this is going to do is it's going to make the game a lot slower and a lot harder. And that is what this is going to do too. So it should be no surprise whatsoever that this is happening. Took me a while to see it, and I wish he just said it outright, but that is clearly what they're trying to do here. They're trying to make Mythic Plus dungeons more difficult, and I think that's pretty obvious. Like I said here, with Mythic 10 being the target out of the gate, and what we've seen on the beta, I think you are going to see dungeons becoming increasingly more difficult and offering, obviously, you know, commensurate rewards to rating like they always have. But without question, you know, he claims, blah, 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 that this is going to be balanced around, but it is not a question of balancing. You cannot do it, okay? Unless you're going to give these classes far more abilities and far more talents and specs and all of these things, you cannot do what you think you're going to be able to do with this. There is still going to be classes that can do really good damage with certain setups and would do really bad damage with other setups, but would have a favor towards maybe utility or survival. And all this, to me, all this does is effectively kill like a huge amount of the hype I have for Azerite gear. Because that was, you know, we talked about this in the video that I released on Monday. Azerite gear was, without question, going to have a huge impact on Mythic Plus, and it still will. But it's going to have, you know, the one, like, say, for example, the Blood DK one, that whenever you use your speed boost, it gave you even more speed and reduced the cooldown on the speed boost. Something like that. I can't actually remember. You can't use that now. You know what I mean? Like, that's made for Mythic Plus. Nobody is ever going to use that in raids. And now nobody is ever going to use it in Mythic Plus. It's a useless trait. So you've basically made the things that would be cool to try and situational impossible to use. And that's going to cross over to classes. And like I said, that's intended. They want to make shit harder. And they want to punish people who are not playing at the top level that they could play at. So at first, like I said, I thought this was without question, you know, like just coming from a lack of insight. But now I see that their insight has actually transcended my own in this front, that they actually are doing this in line with everything else, which is ironic because, you know, his opinion or whatever was that this is in line with other things they've done, mentioning talents and other types of hard swaps in raids and other dungeons. And that's not even what should have been said. What should have been said was this is in line with every other change that has happened in the last 2 years to slow the game down and make it more difficult, more punishing for players who are unprepared, and smooth out as many imbalanced, creative ways that you could overcome this difficulty. To the point that you now effectively have no choice whatsoever in Mythic Plus dungeons. His opinion again was that this is going to make, and I think Laura actually said this, which is ironic. He said it's something like, if you make less changes, if you can make changes less often, it makes those changes more important, right? But again, all that does is marginalize pieces of gear and trinkets and stuff like that are more utility driven, simply inferior to other ones, but might be better in certain utility in certain situations. And it will do the same with classes. And again, that will make playing with those classes considerably more difficult, thus making the dungeon more difficult, potentially harder for your average player. So, unfortunately, before anyone beats me to it, I have to say that this is probably going to be good in the long run. But out of the gate, I was really upset about this because, I don't know, I definitely don't switch gear as often as I should, right? And that's probably some of the things that are going through their heads when they're making these decisions. But without Mythic Plus, I'm not going to wear Cephas if I can't only use it on trash. It's useless on bosses, right? So what's the point of the legendary? It's terrible. If you can't use it on trash, you don't have a legendary there. It's just pointless, right? So that's my concern. But regardless, I do, just like with personal loot, I had the same discussion. Somebody told me, basically explained the point of view that I was missing. And I think ultimately that's probably going to be the case. It's just going to make Mythic Plus harder. It's going to suck for those looking to really maximize their play. But not being able to maximize your play on pull-to-pull basis is actually going to make the dungeon a lot more difficult and consistently more difficult going forward. So anyway, the other thing that was said and really was summarized by my first statements in this video is that they are not ready for this release. And that is the big thing to take away from this. The big thing that I wanted to talk about was the Mythic Plus stuff, but yeah, effectively the class changes section here, if you listen or watch this, it was pretty clear. They basically said we're not ready for this release, and not surprising at all. Like I said, we should not have been surprised that Russia blew out Saudi Arabia on their in Moscow, and we certainly should not be surprised that the window for any major spec changes is rapidly closing, and that the team does not want to make major changes. They won't have time for feedback this close to release, and that soon the target will shift to changes being put in patch 8.1. And that maybe is disappointing to some, but you have to understand that the same thing did actually happen in Legion, even though they had about twice the amount of time. But again, they made about twice the amount of changes. It's no surprise the Legion launched in a horrid state of balance. Really unplayable, if you ask me. Looking back at Emerald Nightmare, what a nightmare it was. It was really out of sync with the game. And comparing that to Antorus, it's almost sad. It's crazy to think how big of a difference the balance situation has undergone. And we're gonna probably see that again in BFA, unfortunately. But some of the things that they did by effectively quote unquote removing things, kind of keeping things as they were, more so, not adding a bunch of new shit. You could read it that way. That is going to make the game easier to balance. So what I say, we should be demanding balance at this point. If they're not going to give us new talents, they're not going to give us new shit, any new spells, whatever, you might have in previous expansions, I'm totally fine with that. But there goddamn better be balance because of it. If there's not, then this whole concept was a waste of time, and this rush to get this expansion out in August, I just don't get it. What's the point if there's not going to be balance? But the whole changing talents and rotation feedback and all of this coming in 8.1, it's just how the game works. This is what happened with Legion. I mean, if you just look at Blood DK in 7.1, 7, then 7.1, 7.2, you see so many patches to their kits, within a, what was that, an 8-month span, maybe a little bit longer, but this is how the game works, okay? But regardless, effectively admitting that they are not going to be 100% ready for this launch, it doesn't bother me, but I think probably some people would be bothered by it. So I won't be surprised at all to see comments, both on the video and also in the forums and all that, about people, further panning the expansion. Like I said, all that we should demand is that there's balance. If there is not balance, then I understand your criticisms, but this is all in the idea of creating a more balanced, more repeatable system here, where we're not spending the first 6 months of the expansion constantly switching characters until we find one that is capable of completing the content we would like to complete. And ultimately, these two things that we talked about today are probably going to help with that, but I'm not really sure. And the other thing that really kind of chaffed me, I guess, regardless, with all of this in mind, was that the patch 8.0 PTR opened today, which, you're goddamn right, it better open today. But it is, can't actually show that, but regardless, it is the 14th of June, and the patch, the PTR just started today. So realistically, next week, it's 19. Week after that is 26. Week after that is the 3rd. That's a major holiday, day before the major holiday. And then the 10th was the day of July. That is, the 10th was the day that I was projecting this patch to come out. I will be leaving for a extended vacation on the 12th. We'll leave on the 12th. And I will return on the 18th. That is the following Wednesday. Knowing my luck, there's pretty much no chance this patch is coming out on the 10th. I was very much expecting them to announce the expansion or the patch's launch date, this Q&A, and the fact, again, that they didn't, pretty much I should have never expected otherwise with how this beta has gone. So yeah, that pretty much tells me I am absolutely fucked. The pre-patch will come out while I am not at my computer for 2 days, and I will come back. I will have to work the next day, and I will effectively not be able to play or cover the pre-patch in its first 3+ days of it being on the servers. I hope this is not the case. I do hope it comes out on July 10th, but I have a feeling, considering the PTR has just gone live today and they're not committing to any type of date, it will not be 3 weeks from now. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Q&A. Despite the comments I made, I'm still extremely excited for BFA. I'm still extremely excited for everything that I've been excited for over the last, 4 or 5 months. I've simply never had more fun playing an alpha, beta, etc., and that's not really going to change. But it does seem like they're really taking this whole, let's make the game slower and more difficult repeatedly. They're really taking this serious. And all I have to say is, all these people who asked for Classic all these years, saying the game's too easy, it's, no meaning to this, all that, showered with gear, all that, you're getting what you asked for without even realizing it. And the irony is, coming back to the previous discussion video we made, that those people they're not even serious players. So Blizzard is making the serious, both serious and non-serious content more replayable, more difficult, take more time, making the game more like Classic in that way. And the people who are effectively the ones who asked for it will not even know it happened. So there you go. That's the future of the game. I'm actually pretty excited for that, but sometimes they work in mysterious ways. So anyway, we'll see you guys tomorrow. I'll be streaming some dungeons on the beta, and hopefully we'll get a good discussion going about this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.